Thanks for tuning in. In this video I'm going to go through the part 3 marking sheet and give you some top tips on how to pass your part 3. We're going to look at the 17 core competencies, going to go through some of the common mistakes people make during their part 3 tests so that you don't have to repeat those same mistakes. Going to give you some good examples, and we're going to be looking at the sheet here, the part 3 marking sheet. So without further ado, let's get started. My name's Howard. I'm an ADI approved driving instructor, and I'm also an instructor training. So I've been helping people like yourself watching this video become fully qualified driving instructors. I'm ORDIT registered, which, if you don't know what ORDIT is, it's a series of letters, ORDIT. So it means I'm on the official register of driving instructor trainers. So basically I've been accredited by the DVSA, the people that set your test, to deliver training in this field, train the trainer training, and I've helped many people over the years become driving instructors. I helped through part 1, part 2 and part 3, which we're going to be talking about today. So today we're going to be looking specifically at the marking sheet and how that works. So I've got the marking sheet here. So it's a pink sheet. It's based on the standards check form. So there's 17 competencies on there, and they are the same competencies. So now the part 3 test has been brought in line with standards check, which is good, because before we had 2 different systems. That was a bit confusing. So now everything's in line, and today what we're going to be doing is going through what those 17 core competencies are. They're split broadly into 3 broad categories of lesson planning, risk management and teaching and learning strategies. So we're going to be going through those, and I'm going to be giving you some hints and tips on each competency to help you avoid some of the common mistakes that come up in the part 3 test, and hopefully then you'll go on and pass, and happy days. So as I've said, on the marking sheet there are 17 competencies on the sheet. You could get a possible 3 in each competency, so a possible 51 points. Now those competencies are broadly split into 3 sections. So the first section is lesson planning, how you plan your lessons. The second section is risk management and how you manage risk on those lessons. And the third section is your teaching and learning strategies. So as we've said, we've got 17 competencies, and the scoring system, you can either get a 0, a 1, a 2 or a 3, as indicated on the marking sheet. I'll probably show you that on a bit close up on the video. So basically, if you get a 0, the examiner has observed no evidence at all in that competency. So that's bad. If you get a 1, they've observed a few elements of that competency. And number 2, you've demonstrated it mostly, but not always. So mostly in that category, you will get a 2. And if you demonstrate that competency in all elements, then you will get a 3. So if you were to pass this, the way I think of it, if you're getting 0s and 1s, then obviously that is not acceptable, and there's serious room for improvement in your competencies on that. If you're getting 2s and 3s, then you're reaching the level and you could pass this. If you've got 2s all the way down, 2s times the 17 competencies, you'd get 34 points. Pass marks 31, so you would just scrape that. So really we want to be aiming for those 3s. 2s would be acceptable, but that means that's highlighting some development areas for you going forwards. But if you're getting 0s and 1s, then you're clearly missing that competency. And when you're working with your trainer, ask them, conduct a lesson and ask them to mark you on a sheet when you feel ready, and then you can see and maybe work with them and mark it and how you feel you did, and then you can see sort of where you might be missing the grade, so to speak. Okay, so when you are planning your part 3, you need to bring a pupil. Gone of the old days where the examiner would stand in and play the role of a pupil for you with the old preset tests. Those days have gone. That finished end of December 2017. So as we went into 2018, the Part 3 test was brought in line with the standards check. Okay, so you need to pick a pupil. So if you have a look at the sheet, you can pick a pupil, anyone, from, in terms of their ability, from a complete beginner, so potentially it could be their very first lesson that you choose, right up to a full licence holder with years of experience. There are some exceptions of people who you can't take for a test. You can't take a qualified ADI, and you can't take someone who's passed Part 2, the Part 2 driving test. So those people are exempt. So you can pretty much use anyone. But the most important thing is that you deliver a lesson based at their ability. So you have to get the level of instruction right. You don't want to be teaching an experienced driver to suck eggs. The learning has to take place as it is a real lesson. Okay, so you've picked your pupil. So now you need to think about your lesson theme. You need to think of a topic, a lesson to deliver to your pupil, and no matter what their ability, learning needs to take place. You don't want to be teaching like a full licence holder to do something that they can already do well, i.e. teach them to suck eggs. There has to be an actual real need, and of course, depending on the level of your pupil, will depend on what level of instruction you will give to that pupil. Whether you're doing a parallel park for an experienced full licence holder that just isn't very good at it, and they kind of avoid it. They sort of park anywhere where they don't have to do a parallel park, or they drive forwards in and sort of bump up the curbs and things like that. So that there would be an actual real need to deliver a lesson, and they will take something from that and learn it. And if the examiner observes learning is taking place, then you're on the right track. Okay, so once you've decided you've got your pupil, you know what topic you're teaching them, you will go to the test centre at the time of your test. You'll wait in the waiting room. You can either take your pupil in with you, or you can leave them in the car. It's really up to you. Once you've met with the examiner and introduced yourself, the examiner is going to ask you some questions about your pupil, where they're at the moment, what their previous experience is, what you've been working on them recently, and which subjects you've chosen today to work on to develop them, and why you're doing that. So then you'll walk to your car. If you've left the pupil in the car, the examiner will introduce himself and explain that he's there not to watch the driver, and they've no reason to feel nervous, that they're just purely there to observe the instructor. Okay, so the examiner will sit in a position, so they will sit in the seat behind the driver, so they'll be looking, they get a good view then of the instructor at work. Okay. The examiner will just briefly explain how the test will work, that it's going to take 1 hour, and that you need to plan to be back in the car park 1 hour from now, and to deliver a client-centered lesson. And then you then just deliver a lesson that you normally would for that pupil. Okay, so that's how the test works. Now the examiner is broadly looking at your competencies. There are 17 competencies, and there are 3 broad categories: lesson planning, risk management, and your teaching and learning strategies. So in the lesson planning side of things, they're looking that you've planned a lesson suitable for that pupil at the correct level, and also they're looking at your ability to adapt that lesson. So if things change in the lesson, new objectives come on board, or your pupil's struggling, that you adapt that. Let's think of an example. Let's say you're taking a new driver, they've had a few hours lessons, and you're working on emerging from junctions, let's say. and you're trying to work on closed junctions, and you're needing to peep and creep, and you're explaining that, and they just keep stalling. Okay, because they can't quite hold their left foot steady on the biting point. So we'd need to adapt the lesson. So if we take them somewhere quiet to a nice straight road, and then they can work on their clutch control and biting point, and just get the car creeping in a straight line in a safe road without all the added pressure of the junction. So now we've taken that little skill, developed it, and so now the pupil is hopefully feeling more confident about creeping the car forwards on the bite. So now if we go back to the junction, and now they start to be able to do that, and so learning has taken place, and you as the trainer have adapted the lesson to fit the needs of your pupil. Risk management. So this is the safety part. This is, you need to be in control of the lesson and make sure that your pupil's safe, other members of the public are safe, and that you're safe, and the examiner. So everyone needs to be safe, and if anything risky happens, anything dodgy, that you need to give good, clear feedback in good time to explain what's happened, and be in control of that situation. Teaching and learning strategies. Well, that's really about matching your teaching style to their learning style, and kind of working in partnership with the pupil. Traditionally, driving instructor, just the name instructor would imply that you tell the pupil what to do. Do this now, this is how I want to do it. And it's very, very instructor led traditionally. Now with this client-centered approach, a much more coaching approach, we work in partnership with our pupil. Everything's done through agreement and working with them. So we're kind of equal partners in the lesson, and we're fitting in with them rather than them trying to fit in with us. So if you can demonstrate that, and those three broad categories, then you'll pass this. We're going to go through the marking sheet in detail and cover all the 17 competencies which fall into those broad categories, and give you some more examples of how you can go ahead and pass this part 3 test. Is your learning resources. Have you got the correct materials to help you? Because you really do need good information. There's a lot of bad information out there, so let's look at what would be good. So in terms of textbooks or books, highway code, bit of a no-brainer. You need the most up-to-date versions of these books, a highway code. Then my next little book here, Driving the Essential Skills. So a really good book to help instructors deliver good content in their lessons, because whatever subject you're teaching, whether you're teaching defensive driving, motorway driving, dual carriageways, breakdown procedures, moving off and stopping, junctions, roundabouts, you name it, it's in this book, and the content is good. This is what you want to be teaching. Let's look at some of the other books. We've got a couple of books by John Miller. We've got this one, Driving Instructor's Handbook by John Miller. This is a really good reference guide. It talks about the process of qualification. So it does talk about part 1, part 2, part 3. Gives lots of good handy hints and tips in there. And also by John Miller, this one, Practical Teaching Skills for Driving Instructors. Excellent book. This has been rewritten recently to reflect the client-centered nature of the test now. So this is an essential read, but make sure you're getting the correct version. Yeah, we're on version, this is the 10th edition. Okay, another really good book that deals with client-centered is this book, Who's in the Driving Seat by Jed and Clare Wilmot. Very good. Lots of instructors that I know are buying this book, and I've read it. It's good, it's very good, so I would highly recommend that. And also on the back here, these people here are top trainers in our industry, so and they've endorsed this book, so it really is a go-to book. Get this book. Also things in your training, apart from textbooks, you'll probably be with a school, a trainer, hopefully an audit trainer, so you'll have some I mean, what I use here, my pupils get, so I just got to find it. So sort my life out. There you go. Here we go. We've got this one. So we've got I just use a module based system for my part 3. So there's lots of different modules, so my students can go home, do homework, study, research the subject, plan lessons, and then we get in the car and deliver. So you'll have some kind of structured training hopefully in place with that for your part 3. You'll want some kind of visual aid. So I use this visual aid by Driver Active, written by John Farlam, again another top trainer in our industry. I'll put a link in the description below, so if you want to get this copy, it's good. There you go, John, I'll do you a bit of selling. So I mean, it's got everything you need. You've got, actually I will take a bit of time on this because how it works. Let's say pedestrian crossings here. Basically what we've got is that you've got the pictures, you can be visual with your training, and it breaks it down into like key areas. So you've got your key notes coming down the side here, so it can help you really structure your lessons and break your lessons down into a nice logical format with little memory joggers to help you think, well, I need to talk about that, like emergency stop, I need to talk about ABS, for example. So that's really good. So like I say, link for that, I'll put a link for all these books in the description below. And also let's just have a look at these two from the DVSA. So we've got the ADI 1. So this is guidance for examiners that conduct part instructor tests, so the part 2s, the part 3s. So remember the part 2 driving tests for instructors is a different test than the learners get. This is not license acquisition. So the tests, even though they look quite similar, but this one's longer, for example. But this is quite a lengthy document, and I would recommend downloading a copy of that from the government website and reading it, and just keeping it as a reference guide, because there's really lots of good detail that will really help you in the future. And just finally, getting organised, is this one, very similar to the one I just showed you. So before I just showed you the ADI 1 document, this is the DT1 document. So this is guidance for examiners delivering the practical driving test for license acquisitions, like the L test. So it's run a little bit differently. Lots of good information here. It's, again, quite a long document. So again, download it, print it, or put it on your iPad and just refer to it. Very worth a read on that one. And just something also that I would like to mention is something I've started using recently with my trainees, is a reflective log. So I use a reflective logbook. So it records all the hours that you're doing. So you don't, I mean, you can do this on your own, off your own back. Just get a log so you can record all the sessions you're doing. And also, the most important part, it's got a reflective log. So after each session, we'll record the date and put in there, you know, what went well, what didn't go so well, and what we need to do better next time. So this is really giving responsibility for the learning to you, the trainee, to make sure that you go away and you really think, yeah, what do I need to do to get better? So it's a real coaching method to encourage you to take responsibility for your own learning. And that's something we will do with our learners, which will come evident in the video as we go through. So under lesson planning, let's take the first competence. Did the trainer identify the pupil's learning goals and needs? So did the trainer identify the pupil's learning goals and needs? So clearly there needs to be some learning goals. Let's use the example of, we're going to go and do a bay park. We're going to recap on a bay park, because I've done it before, but I'm not perfect at it. I need more practice, more development to help me get to a good standard. So there has been a need identified. That's a mutually agreed between the instructor and the pupil, because if I think I'm really good at something and you don't, we need to have that conversation, so we are agreed that there is a need and what we're going to do. So there's an objective to the lesson. So that's really important. Sometimes people take the whole client-centered part too far and think, well, if my pupil wants to do that, even though it's way beyond their ability or skills at the moment, then that's what we must do. Not true. You have to pick a subject, or you have to agree a subject with your pupil that is needed. It doesn't necessarily have to be what they want to do. They might want to do motorways on their second lesson, and that's just not practical. But we could manage expectations and set out a plan on what they need to do. So let's say they did want to go out and do the motorways. Well, okay, that's a target. We could set that as a target, and to reach that target we're going to need to do certain things before we go and do the motorways. Like, for example, drive on faster moving roads, change gears, sort out your steering first, then go on to dual carriageways, and then progress onto the motorways if we have a motorway near us that's available, for example. Okay, so it is about what is needed, not always what they want. Okay, so that's really important. Let's take the next competency. Was the agreed lesson structure appropriate for the pupil's experience and ability? So let's look at that again. Was the agreed lesson structure appropriate for their experience and ability? So we want to make sure we're picking a subject that we don't want to like leap to like level 5 if they're at level 1. We have to build them up and go through a process of building them up to that skill. So let's say, for example, roundabouts. Let's say, yeah, they'd like to do roundabouts. There's a need to do roundabouts. And we take them on to really difficult. The structure of our lesson is to have a big, elaborate, long route that incorporates lots of different roundabouts, mini roundabouts, multi-lane roundabouts, complicated roundabouts, easy roundabouts, all of that. You could argue there that the structure isn't appropriate for their ability because they haven't done it before. And if they haven't done it before, the lesson structure should be much more simple and basic and build on their skills and knowledge step by step. So let's take those roundabouts. Have I done T-junctions yet? Do I know about peep and creep? Do I know about the system, MSPSL and LADA? Can I do rolling stops? Because if I've got those skills, they're a good prerequisite to take me to the roundabouts. Start me off on easy roundabouts. If I'm good at them and I'm happy, then we can progress to the next level and maybe introduce multi-lane roundabouts or busier roundabouts. So it has to be appropriate to their experience and ability. Thank you. Were the practice areas suitable? So you as the trainer, you need to plan a route that matches the ability of your pupil. We don't want to stretch them too far out of their comfort zone. We don't want to chuck them in the deep end, because if we do that, that could be potentially dangerous. And if they're just sort of surviving in that lesson, they're not really learning. So if we do that, we're going to just stress out our pupil and have a dangerous situation, and learning doesn't take place. So if we compare that to, imagine, I don't know, as I said, chuck them in the deep end. Let's compare that to you're a swimming teacher, let's say, and you've got a very nervous person, a bit of afraid of the water, can't swim, and you think, well, I'll just chuck you in the deep end, you'll be alright, sink or swim kind of attitude. You know, that pupil is just barely surviving, and all they want you to do is help them and get them out. So clearly, were the practice areas suitable for that pupil? Well, no, that was far too difficult. So of course what we need to do is we need to pick a practice route suitable for them. So we would be in the shallow end. We would give them the tools that they need, floats, armbands. We might even get in there with them to help them and support them in those early stages. So if we compare that to the learner, let's say they need to learn roundabouts, and they've got this fear of roundabouts. They think, oh, you know, I'm a bit worried about roundabouts, you know, they're busy and oh, I'm not really quite sure, and they've got some barrier and fear about it, we wouldn't just go and plan a route really complicated with lots of different roundabouts with multi-lane, traffic lights on them, busy. You know, we're just going to stress out that pupil. So an appropriate route would be for this beginner who's a bit nervous about it, is take him on a nice easy route, quiet roundabouts, and maybe just go around the block dealing with lefts. Go left round the block, dealing with left-hand roundabouts, and see how they feel with that. And then move on to going ahead or turning right and keep the block the same, but just go round the other way. So ease them into it. But on the other hand, if that's a full licence holder or an experienced, someone who's quite good at roundabouts, and you keep them on that nursery route, then they're going to get quite bored and demotivated because they want to be stretched. So we would look to progress and move on to more complicated roundabouts to try and find their level. We're trying to stretch our pupils, but not throw them in the deep end and take them out of their comfort zone so they're not really learning. And like I say before, if they're just barely surviving, that's not good. Not a good learning environment. So that's dealt with what are practice areas suitable. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Was the lesson plan adapted where appropriate to help the pupil work towards their learning goals? So you, as a trainer, need to be flexible and be prepared and react to the needs of your pupil during that lesson. So you need to be prepared to change the plan. You might be reacting to their faults. So they might have made a mistake, they've stalled, and so you need to correct that and change the plan. You might be reacting to a question that they've asked. They may just be looking confused, so look for the non-verbal cues. They may be looking nervous, scared, anxious, bored. So we need to react and adapt our plan to meet their needs. Now I'll give you an example of something I observed on a part 3 test. I was observing in the back, and the instructor, the PDI, had a full licence holder, and the full licence holder, there was a need to work on their mirrors. They weren't very good at checking mirrors, and they'd recently had a bit of a near miss, hence the reason for the lesson where they changed lanes and they missed something. So they were working on this objective of mirrors. Anyway, they were in a one-way system where basically 2 lanes converge into one, and the full licence holder, the learner in this scenario, said, who has right of way here? They stopped in the road and just said, oh, who has right of way here? And looked confused. The instructor just said, oh, just wait for the other car, let them go and you follow. And they did. Okay, so could the trainer have dealt with that differently? Was there a need there? Do they need to adapt the lesson plan? Is the pupil fully, did they understand that situation? If they was on their own there, they would have stopped and not been confused. Well, actually, in that situation, no one had priority because no road markings didn't indicate otherwise. It literally was just a merge in. And so there was a learning opportunity, something that the full licence holder didn't fully understand, and the instructor basically needed to find somewhere to pull up, talk about it, explore what had just happened, look at it, and then go back and do it again. And then learning would take place and the lesson has been adapted. So there's a good example. The other thing you need to do, if you are changing the plan, you know you're changing the plan, but let's share it. Share it with your learner. Explain what has happened, and with agreement with them, say, okay, well, shall we go and do that again? Not only is that beneficial for the learner to keep them in the picture of what's going on, very useful for the examiner to think, yeah, you've clearly identified a need and you've adapted and changed your plan and you've sought agreement from your client, your pupil, to do that. let's just again re-emphasize with the risk management that you have to score at least 7. Sorry, at least 8. 8 is a pass, 7's not enough. 7 would fail. And there are 5 competencies in risk. So scoring 3 points each, you've got a maximum of 15 points. So you basically have to get over half to pass. So that's really important, because when that examiner's observing your lesson, he needs to know that that safety is paramount, and that you can control the pupil, control situations, be aware of your surroundings, etc., and make sure you, the pupil, and the general public are safe. You know, so that's why it's weighted heavily, because they just need to know, like, you know, have you got what it takes to take control in a situation. Now that doesn't mean that during your test a dramatic incident has to happen. It's not like you have to press the brakes or grab the steering wheel or tell your pupil to slow down. Not at all. If you're in control, then those situations would be prevented, because the skill of a driving instructor is sort of to read situations ahead, be aware of your pupil and their limits and what they can and can't do, and kind of help them to prevent the crisis, you know, of you having to jump in and use brakes or something dangerous potentially happening. You should be able to use proactive Q&A and stay ahead of your pupil, so you can plan and manage these situations, hence risk management, how you managing the risk. So let's take the first one. Did the trainer ensure that the pupil fully understood how responsibility for risk would be shared? So that's really important. Risk should be shared. It's not just the responsibility of the trainer, the instructor, to take all the risk on board for themselves. Likewise, it's not a beginner's job to manage all the risks themselves, because they haven't got the skills. So we have to have some agreement, and we have to talk about it, how we're going to do this. When you go on holiday, if you fly, what do the air stewardesses do before that plane can take off? Every single time they're going to give a safety talk, where the fire exits are, what we do if we land on water, where the life jackets are, etc. So we, as driving instructors, need to manage risk in the same way, because driving a car with a pupil, whether they're a full licence holder or beginner, there is an element of risk, and we need to manage the risk. So let's say we've got a beginner driver, well, beginner, you know, part trained, they've done a few hours, they can drive, and let's say we're going to go and do a bay park. So we're going to recap on a bay park, let's say. So we did the bay park last week, and we're going to go and drive to the same spot we did, and on the drive we think, right, how are we going to manage risk? So we manage risk in each part of the lesson. We're going to manage risk on the drive to the location, we're going to manage the risk at the location doing the bay park and establish who's doing what, who's responsible, and then there'll be the drive back home, or we're going off to do something else. So your lesson will be broken down into little phases, little sections, and each section we should address the risk, because we're doing something new. So let's give you an example on how we can share risk. Let's say our pupil is a full licence holder, has been driving 20 years, but they said, I'm rubbish at parking, I really struggle with parallel parking, and I like some help with that. So we need to drive to a suitable location to do that. Okay, so during this drive we need to establish how risk will be shared. So I would say something along the lines of this. Okay, Mr. Pupil, let's say they're in their car as well. Let's say they're using their own car, so I'm not in my instructor car, I haven't got my dual controls, for example. So I would say, okay, Mr. Pupil, what I'd like you to do, we're going to go to the location to practice parallel parking. Now, as a full licence holder, I'm going to give you responsibility for the drive. So you're being responsible for speed limits, and driving to the best of your ability, following the rules of the road. If, however, you're not unsure of anything, then please ask and I will be able to help you. If you've got any questions about anything, please ask. Because I want to give you a good lesson, and if there's anything you're unsure of, we can cover that with you on the way. Now, as you know, we're using your car today, so I've got no dual controls in the vehicle. So if I feel that you're not dealing with a situation in good time or safely, I will intervene verbally. For example, I will say, slow down, you're exceeding the speed limit, for example. If I did need to take physical action, this would be an extreme situation, and the only options I've got today is to grab the steering wheel, and I'll only do that if safety requires me to do that. I will always intervene verbally first. And we've got a handbrake, a normal handbrake on this car, so that's the only way I could stop this car. I don't anticipate having to do those things, but we just need to establish who's doing what and what happens if something goes wrong. So that would be how we've just had a chat with our pupil, and we've said what we're doing. We're going to drive what I expect from the pupil to drive to the best of their ability, follow the rules of the road, follow the speed limits. But if something goes wrong, I will intervene verbally. If I need to, if safety is compromised, then I've got the physical option. And because I'm not in their car, I haven't got dual controls. So what else have I got? Well, there is a handbrake I could put on. I could grab the wheel, and I'm not expecting to having to do that. So I've made that very clear to the pupil, to my client, of what will happen. So that's just an example. When we get to location, again, we would talk about what the plan is, how we're going to do it, who's responsible for looking all round, what are we going to do if, and so on and so forth. So just an example of how we can share and manage risk. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Were directions and instructions given to the pupil clear and given in good time? So there's a few things to pick out there. Were directions, i.e. route directions, turning left, turning right, and instructions. It's not just about directions, it's about your instructions of how you've agreed to help them. If you've agreed to give someone a full talk through on something, then give that clear and in good time. Okay, so giving directions, giving instructions clear and in good time. So they have to be able to hear you to be clear. So you have to speak, project your voice so they can hear you. And it has to be in good time. We don't want to give route directions late. You know you're not doing very well if the pupil's arriving at the roundabout, just about to go into it and saying, where am I going? That would be bad. And it would be even worse if you were then telling them off for not checking their mirrors and signalling in good time, which these things happen. So if we do our job properly and give our directions and instructions clearly and in good time, we give our pupil every opportunity to do the best that they can do. So it's not fair on them if we don't do our job properly. And it's difficult. It sounds like the easiest thing in the world, but it's difficult. As you're trying to give instructions and comment on things and situations, you still need to remember to give directions in good time. A really good tip I use, and examiners use this on driving tests. At the start of a driving test, the examiner says, okay, in terms of route directions, I would like you to follow the road ahead at all times unless road markings or signs tell you otherwise. If I need you to turn left or right, I will tell you in plenty of time. If there's anything you're not sure about, ask me and I will repeat it. So we could use that in our lessons. We could say, okay, we're going to drive to the car park or wherever it is we're going, and I would just like you to follow the road ahead at all times unless of course signs or road markings tell you otherwise. If I need you to turn left or right, I will let you know in plenty of time. So if we come up to a set of traffic lights and I'm not saying anything, well, we just know we're going to just keep on heading straight at those. Okay, so that's an easy way you can manage that. Examiners do tend to still remind pupils at big roundabouts, big junctions, that they are still going ahead, despite what they've just said in the briefing. But that just keeps it nice and clean and simple, so we can give directions clear and in good time. So if we are talking about things, that pupil always knows, just keep following that road ahead. It encourages them also to think about signs and road markings, so that they get in the correct lane to go ahead. So they're not always asking you, what lane should I be in? Well, you can say, well, what are road markings telling you? Where are the arrows on the road? Where are we going? Where are we going ahead? So we'd like to confirm that in good time. So if they are coming up to a big, complicated junction, yeah, of course, just say, we're going to be following the road ahead here. It's signposted for, let's say, Thetford. And just follow those signs. If you need any help, I can guide you on this. So that would be clear instruction, direction given in good time. Was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupil's actions? So let's repeat. Was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupil's actions? So the instructor needs to be aware, 360-degree aware of what's going on. They need to look at the pupil and notice what the pupil's doing. Is the pupil looking nervous? Are they trembling? Are they sweating? The beads of sweat running down the head? Do they look like they're going to cry, for example? No lie, no joke. I have been present during feedback in exams where the pupil's on the brink of crying and the instructor's not picking up on this, and then the instructor's asking them to go and do more, and they're like, examiners had to say, look, I think this pupil needs a rest now. They're a bit, frazzled. So we have to make sure it's safe. That obviously sounds not safe. If we're stretching our pupil beyond their capability and we're not aware that they're having a complete meltdown and look like they're going to go into one, they might be seeing red mist at that time. So we need to be aware of what's going on with the pupil. So watch your pupil, see what they're doing, talk to your pupil, understand your pupil, get an idea of how they're feeling. There are ways we can do that. I use a traffic light system to sort of say, how are you feeling? That's maybe one for another video, but there's lots of little tips and strategies we can use to know how your pupil's feeling. Okay, so let's have a look at the next one. Was any verbal or physical intervention by the trainer or instructor timely and appropriate? So, as they say, prevention is better than the cure. You're not actively looking to go slamming on the brakes and undermine your pupil. So there's a fine balance between getting the level of instruction just right. We don't want to over-instruct, we don't want to under-instruct. And if we get that right, we can manage situations, manage our risk, and the need to intervene will be diminished. Let me just have a little think. So, as the instructor, it's your job to maintain control. And as I say, prevention is much better than the cure. So, this can go hand in hand with your route planning. So, let's say you've got your lesson and you're going to, you're going to go and do a parallel park, let's say. And you've got your learner, they haven't passed their test yet, so they're not a licence holder yet. And, they've had 20 hours. And you're going off to practice your park, as agreed. Now, on the way, there's a very tricky mini roundabout that most drivers, because it's so tight, just tend to drive over the top of. And to negotiate it properly means you have to go really slow, and there's other associated risks with it. So rather than just head towards it without any plan or any kind of help or support to your pupil, we could discuss it and sort of say, well, just have a little recap of the rules and roundabouts and what we're going to do. And maybe outline that on our route today, there's a particular difficult roundabout that most drivers will ignore the road markings, etc. And we might even put in why they might do this, why other drivers might be taking this course of action. we could then assess the risk with them, make them aware of what's going on, and therefore we have just potentially prevented this situation. So as we drive towards that roundabout, we could say to our pupil, okay, this is the roundabout I was talking to you about, so just remind me, use Q&A, proactive Q&A, what position are you going to take on it? And then we do fine. Without that, it could be a case of, all right, slow down, steer left, verbal, tell you what to do, intervention. And of course, if they do something potentially dangerous, you might have to physically, the nuclear option, and go in with either steering wheel intervening there, or using the brakes, for example. So we want to try and prevent that. That's not part of our plan to take over and take the control away from the learning, because that's very undermining. If as a driver, how would you feel if someone just suddenly took over from you? It's not a good feeling. You've failed at that point. That you've not done well. That you've messed up. So prevention much better than cure. So if these things do happen, they do escalate because of either through a lack of planning or just a lack of anticipation of what other people might do, and it's needed, then yes, it must be timely, it must be appropriate, and of course afterwards we need to give feedback. We have to explain what we've done, why we've done it. Okay, so let's just look at the next one. Links quite nicely to the previous one, because now we're looking at, was sufficient feedback given to the pupil? Sorry, let me repeat that. Let's look at the last one. So this one links quite nicely with the last one. Was sufficient feedback given to help the pupil understand any potential safety critical incidents? So we've already established that prevention is better than the cure. Okay, and so for whatever reason an incident has happened, safety was affected. Had the instructor not have intervened either verbally or physically, a dangerous, illegal situation potentially would have happened. Okay, so it's so important we provide timely feedback. Now we have to pick somewhere safe to do that. It might not be safe at the location. For example, I sat in the back of a Part 3 test where the instructor, the training instructor, was taking their pupil, a learner, to work on mini roundabouts. And en route to the location, the training area, was a sharp left bend on a rural road. And they went down that bend, fast into that bend. As they went round the bend, they exited over onto the other side of the road as an oncoming car was coming. The oncoming car braked, steered to avoid us. The instructor at that point made no attempt to either verbally or physically intervene. Needless to say, they didn't do, the outcome of that test didn't go in their favour because of that reason, because they didn't manage the risk. So if we think back, prevention, as we said before, is better than the cure. If we know we're going through a particular tricky bend and we know our pupil, we need to assess what's the likelihood of them not coping too well with that bend and help them. So we would do a little recap. We're going to go down a country road, going to be a sharp bend. Have we done bends before? How are you going to judge your speed on approach to that bend? Have we talked about limit points before? Let's just recap on it to make sure that we do it. Once you've recapped on it, you'd do like how you're going to manage that risk. So when we get to that bend, who's responsible for dealing with it? Establish that. Because they might be feeling, yeah, I know I can do that, I've done it before. Or they might think, no, actually, could you help me? So we'd agree what the level of instruction will be coming into that corner. And of course, if the learner isn't dealing with that sufficiently, then the instructor would say, well, if I feel you're going in too fast, I will tell you to slow down. I will say brake now, brake more, for example. If I feel that you haven't braked enough and we're going too fast into that bend, then as you know, I've got my dual controls and I can bring in the brakes and keep control. So we go around that corner safely. Prevention better than cure. So we could use Q&A on approach. Then if it escalates, we use a direct order, slow down. And if that fails, we go physical and we can slow the car and go round safely. Now in this example I gave you, none of that happened, so it happens. So at very least, it's like shutting the door after the horse has bolted. Provide sufficient feedback after it. And now that was very late coming. It wasn't done till after the lesson on the mini roundabouts. And in the return trip, the instructor agreed that they would go the same way back to have a practice at that bend. And a misunderstanding, I feel, of what client-centered was that the instructor said, how do you want to deal with the bends on the way back? And the pupil said, no, I'll be all right. Yeah, I can do them. Well, I would overrule that as an instructor. So no, that it wasn't safe on the way. I insist that I will be helping you on this so that we stay safe. More work was needed to help the pupil fully understand the impact of what they've done, and then the remedy, more work, more practice on it with the instructor's help, is what was needed in that example. So now we're going to look at the teaching and learning strategies. So we're back to the form, and now we're in the last section around this bit here. Now there's 8 competencies there, so a possible 24 points. And if we go through again, just like we've been doing, we'll go through each one and just give you some examples of how you can apply this. So was the teaching style suited to the pupil's learning style and current ability? So we've got some key words there. We've got teaching style. Does it meet the learning style and the current ability? So let's just look at learning styles for a little bit. Now, as you've gone through your training, you'll probably be aware of the VAC learning styles, the visual, auditory and kinesthetic. So people learn in different ways, and what we try and do is find the way that particular person learns best and match our teaching style to match that. So if they're very visual learners, then using visual aids will really help that pupil look at things, looking at pictures and working out how they're going to do things and seeing it on the paper, rather than, oh, we're going to go up there and using your hands and doing all this, and they'll be like, what are you doing? So yeah, we want to be very visual for these learners. So we want to tap into all these learning styles, because people in some measure will use all of these learning styles to pick up. So for example, if we're using a visual aid, we would use the picture to be visual. We would say the words. So let's say we was teaching MSPSL, we would say mirrors, so they hear the word. We point at the word on the page. So we're picking up on their visual skills, on their auditory skills. And then the kinesthetic is all about doing. Most people learn by doing. To learn to drive, you need to drive. You can't look in a book and learn to drive. You have to get out and do it. Likewise for yourself, you're learning to teach. So the best way for you to learn to do that is to get out and teach. So if you're preparing for your part 3, you've got options. You could go out on a trainee or pink license and practice with pupils. If you're not going to do that, whoever you're going to take for your test, whether it be a full license holder, you need to get out there and practice. Know what makes them tick. Understand your pupil. Build rapport with your pupil. Know what their little faults are. So then you'll go into that exam really knowing what you're going into. You know, it's a test. I'd like to go into a test knowing exactly what I can expect. So you should do the same. Okay, so back to that competency. So we're thinking about our teaching style matching their learning style, and like I say, kinesthetic is the best way. So there will be some explanations, but getting out and doing it, there is no substitute, and that's where the learning will take place. If they've made a mistake, talk about it, agree what needs to change, go round, do it again. So now they've done it, and what happens, their confidence goes up because they think, oh yeah, I did it that time, I did it on my own, well done. Like Bay Park, let's say, they tried their first attempt, didn't quite go in the bay, in the centre, or went over the white line or something like that, and they think, oh, do you know, if I could just have another go, I'm sure you know, with your help, with the instructor's help, I could get in that bay. And then once they've done it, they're like, yay, I did it. So we would be scoring well using that strategy by understanding our learner and matching our teaching style with their learning style. And well, the second one down, teaching and learning strategies, was the pupil encouraged to analyse problems and take responsibility for their learning. So we've already said that you, as a trainee driving instructor, you have already taken responsibility for your learning. That's why you're watching me and other people online. You're researching, you're looking in the books, you're actively trying to solve this problem of how to pass this part 3 and become an effective driving instructor. So just like your learners, we want to do the same. We want to encourage them to solve problems, because if we solve the problem ourselves, we're more likely to remember it and get it better next time. If you just tell me what to do and how to do it, spoon feeding me, well, what if I forget? I need to understand this fully and do it myself. So often when a mistake is made, we can use visual aids. You know, when the car's stopped, obviously, use visual aids and give them the problem. What happened there? What should you have done differently? What would you do next time? So that they can think, oh yeah, I see that now. And what would be the consequences if you do? Oh yeah, that was dangerous, for example. So let's say you're teaching, let's go back to the Bay Park example. You're teaching someone to do a Bay Park. They've never done it before, and they've put their heart and soul into doing this, and they've just not finished quite in the bay. So they're understandably, sorry, just make sure it's recording. They're understandably feeling a little bit disappointed because they didn't quite finish in the bay. So rather than say, well, you needed to do this, this and this differently, take a step back, do it, review it, say, okay, well, how did you feel with the Bay Park? Oh yeah, not so good. Okay, well, let's look at what was good about it first. Let's look at your coordination of controls. That was excellent, very good. Encouragement. Let's look at your observation. Your observation was effective and all round. 10 out of 10. Very good. So what do you feel you would need to do better with that manoeuvre? Well, I just need to finish in between the lines. Okay, so let's get the visual aid out. Let's look at what you did and what the possible causes of how you ended up in the position you're in. And they might look at that and think, oh yeah, I know what I did. I need to steer at that point, for example. Okay, so how will you recognise when you're at that point next time? Oh yeah, no, I know. I know the point I did it last time, so if I just correct that, if I steer a little bit later, then I think I'll end up in the bay. Well, shall we try that then? Do you need my help to do that, or would you like me just to let you get on and see how you get on? If, you know, then there's the risk thing. If, however, you're not dealing with a situation, I will intervene and say, well, just wait here, you know, to make sure everything's safe. So if we give them the problem and they can solve it, then when they do that and they fix that problem, they get that eureka moment. They think, yay, I did it, I did that. And so they're very motivated, they're encouraged, and they're taking responsibility for their own learning. So there's lots of examples you could use for this, but you really want to be getting your pupils to think and stop telling them the answers. It's a bit like if you was a maths teacher and you know you've got a class of kids and they're all doing this maths equation, and let's say the correct answer is 49. So yes, so sorry, my son just went past. This is a distraction. What was I saying? I'm going to come back to that example because I like it. So let's just say then, let's imagine that you're a maths teacher and you're managing a class, you're teaching a class of kids, and let's say the answer to this maths equation is 49, for example. So you've got one pupil in there that doesn't get it. They've got 38, and because you haven't got time, you just go up to say, well, that is 49, put 49 in there and walk on. Okay, you've given them the answer. They've answered that they've answered that correctly now. But did they learn anything? They don't know how you, because you did it. How did you get to 49? What that pupil needs is for you to go through and work through with them what they did and at which point they went wrong. And then if you can help them realise that and get them to understand that, and then they do it again and they come up with 49, they're going to be like, yay, I did that. And now they're at they've achieved it. And if another question comes up similar, as long as they're applying the same rules and the same format, they will get the answer right again. So now I can take that to a driving example. If we just tell them what to do, they might not understand the possible consequences. It might be illegal, it might be dangerous. But now if we go through and get them to think about it and solve the problem and analyse that, they're going to go, you know, yeah, do you know what? I get that. I won't do that again. Happy days. So that's a good example of that. Well, opportunities and examples used to clarify learning outcomes. So let's have a look. Opportunities and examples used to clarify learning outcomes. So let's think of an example. Let's say that I, your pupil, when I exit a roundabout, I don't signal. Don't see the point. Why bother? Okay, so I don't signal to come off roundabouts because I don't. My family, when I see them drive, they don't do it, and a lot of other drivers don't do it. And I don't really understand why I should do that. So you've identified this fault, you've analysed it with me and gone through it with me. And now you're getting me to use a signal when we exit the roundabout. Then we come up to a roundabout, and as we're waiting there, I'm waiting for a car coming round who exits. And I think, oh, hidden signal. That would be a good opportunity, a good example to clarify these learning outcomes. So that's what we could do. If we see examples of that where we're not exploiting other people's mistakes, saying, oh, look at that idiot driver or whatever, we are just thinking, well, there's a good example of why we would do that. Let's say when we stop behind cars in traffic, we don't leave tyres and tarmac. Okay, and that's been identified. It's been just making sure it's recorded. It's been identified. It's been analysed, and I know why I should do it. I know all of the reasons, and I get it. And now I'm starting to do it. It's being implemented. The remedy is in place. I am doing it. And then, who's behind? Big old van or lorry, anyone really close to the back of my bumper. Well, there's an example, because that's what we used to do. So we could say, well, how does that make you feel? Well, I feel quite intimidated. It's like, it seems to be in my personal space. I don't like it. It's making me a bit nervous. So there we are using an example of, well, remember that's how you possibly were making other people feel when you did that. Got it. So there it comes full circle, and I understand, because if we can see it from someone else's perspective, often helps us to fully understand the situation. So if we can use examples, you're on the right track. Was the technical information given comprehensive, appropriate and accurate. So it sounds like an obvious one, but whatever advice you're giving your pupils, it does need to be correct. So for example, if you're going through the 2-second rule following distance and you're implementing that 2-second rule and it's raining and you're not following a 4-second rule, then you are now giving bad advice. So you need to make sure you're real tip top on your knowledge. You need to know the contents of this book and the highway code, because you really do need to give them the correct information. I know it sounds obvious, but be a master of your subject, really know it and nail it and pass on good information. Someone I was helping, full license holder, lost a bit of confidence, wanted some lessons, and during the course of that her first lesson, I learned from her that she thought she had to be in 2nd gear for every roundabout, even if it wasn't appropriate gear. So some of these more fast moving roundabouts where she was going ahead, which you could probably maintain 25-30 miles an hour through it, she was slowing it right up to 2nd gear because she thought that's what you're supposed to do. So why did she do that? Well, her driving instructor, when she learnt to drive all those years ago, told her that's what you need to do, and she took that very literally and has taken it through life. So we just challenged her view on what would be an appropriate speed and why people overtake her on the left side and the right side on these roundabouts, and what she could do differently. And she agreed, I could be going faster, but what? So why don't you then? Well, I have to be in 2nd gear. So once that was realised and she knew what to do, she can now deal with that safely. But you know, it just remains that the responsibility of that driving instructor, what he told her had lasted a lifetime, and it's only until recently that that's been fixed. And she's like, really? Wow. Anyway, moving on. Okay, was the pupil given appropriate and timely feedback during the session? So during your 1-hour lesson, it is important that you remember to give your pupils feedback. Remember, they're putting their heart and soul into trying to do a good job. No one is ever trying to do a bad job. Everyone's trying their best. So if we can give them timely, appropriate feedback, be honest with them, be specific about what they've done, and avoid generic, yeah, that was okay. Well, what was okay? My mirrors, or what was it that was good? So we need to make sure our feedback is specific. It needs to be timely. Now, a really good method of giving feedback that I go through with my pupils is rather than the praise sandwich, is to use 2 goods, 1 better. So we want to be encouraging. You know, you did this well, you did this well, and to make it even better, if you did this. So now we can give that feedback. We can also look at scaling, and we can ask the pupil how they feel. This is the best way, in my opinion, to ask them how they feel. So let's say they've just done a roundabout. We're teaching them roundabouts and they've just done this roundabout. And we ask, how did they feel with that? And yeah, we're going to pull up first. So we're going to have a chat, review it. How did you feel? Yeah, it was good. Okay, what would you give yourself out of 10 so we can scale it? So let's say they say an 8. So 8's good. So let's talk about what made it good. What was good about it? Well, I checked my mirrors, I signalled, I got in the correct lane, etc. Okay, so why an 8? Why not a 10? What would make it a 10? What would you need to do differently? So now they can say, well, actually, yeah, I think I accidentally put it in 4th gear. I meant to put it in 2nd gear, so the car laboured through the roundabout and it felt a little bit quick. Okay, so if we can improve that, we can get you a 10. We can get you up to a 10. So let's go do that again. And this time, how do you want me to help you? Do you want me to leave you with the mirrors, the signal positioning? Because you can do that. When it comes to the gear, we need to understand why you took 4th gear and not 2nd. So do we need to look at the palming method? Do we need to have a little practice at doing that and build your muscle memory up and your skills of doing that, so that when you get to that roundabout you can nail it with absolute confidence and do it? Whatever you agree, get on and do it, and then go do it again. And and again review it. Now they've just put their heart and soul into doing that again properly and doing it correctly. Be sure to give them the praise and recognition they deserve. Only give praise where it's due. Were the pupils' queries followed up and answered? Now it sounds obvious, doesn't it, that as a trainer we should answer the questions of the pupil. Now they need to be answered in the terms of the test within that lesson, because the examiner is observing. He can only mark what he observes. So if a question is asked and it's not answered, you will be marked down. Okay, so pupils will ask questions. So let's give you an example. Now I sat in the back of a part 3 this year, and right at the very end of the test they were driving back into the test centre, and the instructor said drive forwards into any bay, and the pupil said, do I need to signal? And the instructor said, no, just go straight into that bay over there. Okay, they then did the little debrief, reflected on what had just happened, but he didn't answer that question. So the pupils think, well, I don't know, do I signal? Do I not signal? So you are being assessed right till the end. So that question needed to be answered, and rather than just tell them, well, he did answer. He said, no, just pull into that bay. So, okay, so he answered it, but was that a full answer? Did he help the pupil fully understand that problem? And going back to problem solving, we need to get that pupil to take that problem, think about it, and think what the solution is. So if that had been explored a little bit more in detail, just making sure that's recording, if that had been explored in more detail, then that would have been much better. So had the instructor said to him, well, okay, well, put into the bay, and we'll come back to that. What do you think? What do you think you should need a signal? Get them into the bay, then talk about it. And then you can explore it and say, okay, so you just asked that question, should we signal? Well, why do we signal? To let people know where we're going. Okay, so on this occasion, would anyone have benefited from that signal? No, the car park was empty. Okay, so was a signal necessary? Well, no, I don't suppose it was. Okay, so let's say there was another car in the bay and there's people in it. What do you think those other people might be planning to do? Well, maybe drive out of their bay? So would they benefit from your signal? Well, yes. Okay, so in that scenario, what you've got to do is look, assess, decide who's about. Think about, will anyone benefit from a signal? And if in doubt, signal. Because if you signal to no one and they're not looking at you or whatever, does it matter? Not really. Okay, so now next time you'll know what to do. Oh yeah. So now we've answered the question fully. Did the trainer maintain an appropriate, non-discriminatory manner throughout the session? Sounds obvious. We cannot disrespect other road users. We can't say, oh, typical taxi driver, look at him, or look at this idiot white van driver behind me, because that is not setting the right precedent to your pupils. We are professional driving instructors, and we wouldn't say things like that, even though I just did. Sorry about that. So yeah, we have to be professional, because this will rub off on your pupils. So we have to be totally PC, and if, let's say, someone rushes past us on an overtake, we don't want to say, oh, look at this idiot overtaking, he's done it because we're a learner. A better way to do that would be, well, I wonder why they did that. I wonder what was going on in that car at the time. We just don't know, do we? He could have found out that a member of his family has been taken to hospital, or he had his wife in the car going into labour, and he's got to get somewhere quick, and that's why he did it. We just can't make these assumptions, and we need to be professional and try and understand and see it from other people's point of view. So we don't want to be disrespecting other people at all, really. at the end of the session, was the pupil encouraged to reflect on their own performance? So now we're going full circle. The lesson is finished and the pupil needs to think about what went well, what didn't go so well, and what they would do differently next time. That will then form the basis of what we're going to do next lesson. Because in a 1 hour lesson, you're probably going to have some loose ends, some things that we need to get better at. So if we've been doing that Bay Park, in a 1 hour lesson, if I've never done it before, I've only done it once before, will I be perfect at it? There's probably more development issues. So we could reflect on what we're doing well, what we didn't do so well, and what I would need to do differently next time. So then we can take that forwards to the next meeting. It's really important that we do just reflect. And yeah, a really good question to ask your pupil is at the end of the lesson, well, what would you take away from that lesson? What did you learn? What did you get? Has learning taken place? Did you get value for money? Is basically what we're saying. Scaling method's really good. We can use that, as I've explained. We can use the coaching questions, as I've just explained. What was good? What wasn't so good? What would you do better? What did you take away from this lesson? So make sure you do that and leave time to do that at the end of the test. I would suggest at least 5 minutes. Aim to be back in the test centre 5 minutes before the end of the test, so you can just reflect and go through and sort out what needs to happen next. Thanks for watching. Okay, so that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. I know it's a long video, but I really hope you got something out of it. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Please like if you do, and let me know what you want me to cover next. I'd be happy to do any subjects you like around the part 3, the part 2, or just stuff in general about helping you teach your learners. Yeah, so drop me a line, leave me a message, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks a lot. I'm gonna pause because my neighbour's looking at me. Hello. Thinks I'm mad. She does think I'm mad. Talking to myself in the car. So yeah, I've put my... Oh, my son's coming home now. Okay, so I've put my heart and soul... I'm going to have to come back to this. That is still recording, isn't it? Yeah, sorry, I've just paused it, but yeah, that's good. Cheers.
I'll be out in like a minute. I've got to go to work. I'll sneak out. Don't worry.
Don't worry, I'll just stop talking when you come.
Thank you.
Yeah, my point. We're going to cut that bit.